Serious ex-cult members, what was your oh shit, I'm in a cult moment? When the leader wanted to split up all the marriages and take the wives for himself, and when he wanted to give the husbands of those wives different women to be with, basically sharing the women, except nobody had a say in who they were to be with. Many people were deeply unhappy and pained by this, but they had to submit to the Holy Spirit, as they would say, and do what they were told. I was a teen at the time, my family and I left this cult, so thankfully I was not pawned off on some random guy. When I was stationed on Okinawa, late 90s, I went to this church that seemed to be the pretty generic Christian church, but they met in a small room above a store. Didn't think much about it until they got a new pastor. They owned a house in town and always invited everyone over for some cookouts and Bible study. The new pastor was actively encouraging the enlisted service members to move into the house and get the housing allowance to support the house. Then he wanted to see our pay stubs to ensure we were supporting the church enough. I think the final straw was when they started taking attendance for their 7 days. Yep, you were expected to attend some church thing 7 days a week of services, and trying to shame anyone that didn't make it to something. I didn't tell them I wasn't going anymore, just stopped showing up. They knew where my barracks room was and sent soul savers to get me back to the church. The last time they talked to me, they again went with the shame route that no other church would get me into heaven, and I told them I think they proved I made the right decision. South Korean cult. I attended but thankfully didn't join in the end. I had just moved to Korea at 18 and didn't really know anyone. I was just starting to learn Korean, conversational, but still low level, and didn't really have a lot of friends yet. Someone invited me to go to church with them, and they were really nice, and I wanted to meet people. I had a lot of fun at this church. The people would take me out to eat, help me with Korean, and even help me with my homework/test prep. It was 100% the nicest church I've ever visited, and I felt like I had a place to fit in now. This is how they suck people in. Also, there was a female pastor who was super hot and would sometimes let people, always younger men, stay with her if they needed a place. I always wondered if this was an intentional tactic to try to lure more young men in, because this specific church, one location of many, seemed to only go after men. Eventually they started pressuring me to make myself unhealthy, saying that there was a balance between physical and spiritual strength. I love bodybuilding, so me being physically strong was an issue. They were pressuring me to lose muscle and try to make myself sick if possible, to make my body as weak as possible. They said if I didn't, my soul would grow restless and crawl out of my mouth when I was asleep. I repeatedly said I wasn't interested, but wanted to continue attending this church. This was not acceptable at all. They strongly pressured me to start making myself sick. I stopped going to the church and they waited outside of my school for me and followed me around for what seems like a couple months. They knew my class schedule and were always outside trying to talk to me. Eventually in the end they backed off and I never heard from them again. Another guy from the church also got creeped out and left, and we are still good friends to this day. I was in a cult that was run by a family member. It was a small group, and we were to give 100% loyalty to this family member, financial and everything. It escalated to be my whole life for a good 5 years, and I didn't know what normal relationships were. I met a guy and he showed me what love actually is. He told me that this relationship I had with this family member wasn't loving, and I immediately knew. Told him everything and was out since then. It was so hard to say I think I might be in a cult, but I did. Blacklisted family member and other members and haven't looked back. Not exactly what was asked, but a fascinating story. A friend of mine is adopted. 4 years he was weighing the pros and cons of trying to find his birth family. One of the major cons was the expense. Anyway, one Christmas, his wife bought him a genetic testing kit. One of those things where you spend $100 and you find out what percentage of your genetic background traces back to where. It turns out, when you do this, they also match you on their database to relatives. He found out that he had a genetic cousin who'd also taken the test. He got in contact with the guy. The guy talked to his parents, and they were able to piece the story together. My friend's parents are married to each other. Back when his BO mom got pregnant with him, she and the father were not married, and because my friend's BO dad was with the JW, he could have been disfellowshipped for having sex before marriage. So instead she had the child quietly, gave him up for adoption, then they got married and proceeded to have 3 more kids. So my friend suddenly found his BO family, including 3 full-blooded brothers, that he might never have known about. We joke about how his parents did him a favor by giving him up instead of raising him in a cult. That being said, there are a lot of complicated emotions involved in that kind of situation. I always kinda knew, but it really clicked for me when I was 15. My friend, also 15, had recently gotten knocked up by someone else in our youth program and had gotten an abortion. Told almost no one. Within a week, she and her entire family were ousted from the church, and they railed on her and backquote her since for months. I think that's the moment I knew when I was done. My grandpa, who was not in the church, also used to tell me they were on an FBI watch list as a hate group. Don't know the validity of that, but I wouldn't say it was unwarranted. I had 6 before I was married, and my parents turned me into the elders for discipline. I said I didn't think what I did was wrong, and they excommunicated me from the church, friends, and family. Parents did not let me talk to my siblings while they grew up. I have not spoken to 2 of my siblings in 12 years now, and I speak to my parents about once per year. It really fucked me up and left me unable to form close relationships. I was raised in a church that only just barely doesn't constitute as a cult. There was so much sexual and emotional abuse in the past, and the women are so heavily controlled you couldn't pray with a man in the same building as you without either asking for forgiveness afterward or asking for permission to do so beforehand. When I was in high school, I had a teacher who described what healthy boundaries were, and I'd realized that what was going on in this church was so very abusive. I had to fight hard to get out. My family is still so engrossed in believing in these things they teach that it's hard to maintain a relationship without them mindlessly telling me I have to return. I never will. I grew up fundamentalist evangelical Christian. My dad saw the Duggars on TV and decided we were gonna be like them. Long skirts, modest clothes, courtships, all of it. My mom had gone through early menopause due to cancer treatment, but that was merely a small roadblock. I went to church every damn day. I was not allowed to question the doctrine. I was not allowed to study for the SATs, because my mission in life, per God, was to get married and have babies. I was responsible for the impure thoughts my male counterparts had. It was my job to dress in such a manner that they weren't tempted. I got my 17-year-old ass beat with a belt because I wore jeans to school. I was told that women shouldn't have a voice in their reproductive care because that's what God is for. So no sex until marriage, no birth control. Also, women who had sex before the holy bonds of wedlock were compared to used scotch tape. I'm out now. I had sex before marriage. My dad refers to my daughter as a bastard. We don't speak. Him tapping this out wearing a tank top and shorts. I hated my life in that cult. I love it now. I did a high school exchange in the States when I was 16 over 17 from New Zealand. The town I was placed in was super small and close-knit and extremely traditional. I went to church with them, and honestly the first service I attended I was expecting a camera crew to jump out at any time. I was holding back laughter and had to leave the room because I found everything so ridiculous. As weeks went by I realized it wasn't a joke. These people were serious. I would still have to leave the room, but not to laugh instead. To hide in the bathroom and cry. I had to attend the youth group classes also with my host sister, and the pastor was teaching this whole generation of kids such vile mindsets. He told them that blacks and gays are not to be tolerated, especially not in these walls, the church. He would teach them that God only serves them if they go to their church, because they are the only ones that are worth God's time. He taught them that dinosaurs never existed, and the University of Tennessee planted the fossils around the world. The moon is not real, and is instead just a ball of light, similar to the sun. They would stand up during services and cry, hold their small children above their heads, and the adults would scream. I have no idea what they would yell, but every time was so passionate. My last day in the States, they pulled me up to the front and gave me a Bible. They said, now we know for sure that God is able to serve even in other countries as you go home, and he will be in your heart forever.